In 2011, the regime of longtime Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi was overthrown. Having fled Benghazi, his capital, Gaddafi was on the run and hiding in a drainpipe when the rebels found him in his home city of Sirte, some 300 miles to the west of the capital. A Day in History recently covered the death of Gaddafi and the viciousness of his regime. But suffice it to say that the unpopular Gaddafi was beaten within an inch of his life and then executed with one of his gold-plated pistols. Not with him were his former constant companions and personal guard known officially as the Revolutionary Nuns. Yes, nuns. They also had an unofficial name, Gaddafi's Amazons, after the mythological female Greek warriors. Though many people believe that the Amazons were only for show, and they certainly attracted attention when Gaddafi traveled abroad, most of the women in the unit were well trained in martial arts and an international assortment of firearms. Gaddafi wasn't the only casualty among the ruling elite of Libya to die in the uprising of 2011. Two of his sons, Khamis and Mutassim, were killed in the uprising. Another brother, Saif, was killed earlier in April in a NATO airstrike to prevent the regime from killing civilians in rebel-held areas. Among the many casualties were dozens of the revolutionary nuns. Most of their casualties came in Benghazi and Gaddafi's hometown of Sirte. Contrary to what many believed might happen, a number of Amazons, likely dozens, died fighting the rebels alongside loyalist male units. A number of Amazons were able to escape to other countries, where a number of them still live, quiet, unassuming lives of anonymity. Despite Gaddafi's stated commitment to a more equitable society for women, Libya was still a conservative Muslim country, and a number of rebel groups were thoroughly fundamentalist. Between hatred for everything the regime stood for and an ingrained belief that women should remain at home sequestered from male society, many captured Amazons were raped, beaten, and otherwise humiliated. Many were beaten, and some were beaten to death. Another number were shot out of hand and their bodies left to rot. A very far cry from the luxurious life they led under Gaddafi. A luxurious life that came with a cost. A year after Gaddafi's overthrow, British comedian Sacha Baron Cohen starred in the movie The Dictator, a satire of third world dictators worldwide and of the recently dead Gaddafi. It was funny, and the women were all models in high heels. In reality, the top-ranking Amazons were older, and let's say not models. However, many of the younger recruits were. If you know anything about dictators and the men around them, you can probably figure out that armed protection was not the only service provided by the Amazons, and that service was not always provided willingly. Gaddafi, being a somewhat savvy manipulator of the media, often traveled with two groups of Amazons, a show version and the real version. Some of the younger, beautiful Amazons were indeed in the dictator's bodyguard corps, but most of the women seen by the world's media were tall, slim, sometimes blonde and blue-eyed beauties dressed in tight full military uniforms consisting of tight jackets and miniskirts with berets and high heels. Other times, it would be form-fitting jumpsuits. A lot of people in the world found Gaddafi's Amazons another strange affectation of the Libyan strongman, but there have been units whose ranks were filled exclusively by women. The most famous example is the Dahomey Amazons of West Africa, who defended the territory of their king with skill and zeal in the 1800s. In World War II Soviet Union, women snipers and the famous Night Witch Night Bomber Squadron pilots were dedicated all-female units. In the 20th century, uniformed Israeli women, most notably during the War of Independence in 1948 and during the 1973 Yom Kippur War, fought side by side with male units and often paid a high price. Gaddafi and his inner circle called the Amazons the Sisters. The word sister has many different meanings in both English and Arabic. There is a literal meaning. A good friend who is a woman can be a sister to both their male and female friends. The most famous example in English is Catholic nuns, often called sisters, both formally and informally. Gaddafi's intention was to imbue the Amazons with a sort of quasi-holy quality. Sisters in defense of his regime and his political theory, which he called the Third Universal Theory, capitalism and communism being the first two. The Great Socialist People's Libyan Arab Jamahiriya was Gaddafi's plan to rule through committees chosen democratically and locally. Still, within a short time, they became corrupt, and another tool through which Gaddafi could rule. Still, in his famous Green Book, which spelled out his political thought, Gaddafi attempted to break with mainstream Muslim Arab beliefs. In the book, he explained a new role and attitude towards women. Women and men are equal as human beings, in the sense that they have the same physiological needs, and are thinking and feeling beings. Which sounds pretty good, and to a degree it was, considering the treatment of women in many other Arab countries. However, he goes on to say, however, sexual dimorphism gives rise to gender roles which are natural and appropriate to the differences between the sexes. Freedom consists in following nature, specifically in women having the ability to raise families without being forced by society to seek work which is suitable only for men. So, on the one hand, equality, on the other, limitations. But Gaddafi was a man of contrast who liked to be noticed and to rock the boat. In the 1980s, he formed the Amazons. Initially, Gaddafi ran a widely publicized campaign for the Amazons. Most people believed that part of the reason was an earnest desire to show his people, especially the women in urban parts of the country, that he was committed to bettering women's lives, and that there were opportunities for women in the Muslim world. Gaddafi was also shrewd. He believed that any potential assassin, especially one from Muslim lands, would hesitate to kill women, and that would be all the time his sisters needed to gun them down. Gaddafi also had agents roaming the country looking for women who were both interested in the job and who were loyal to him. Background checks were run to make sure that the men in the candidates' families were loyal too and had not been in trouble with the regime. Height, strength, and attractiveness to Gaddafi were also factors. Many women were volunteers attracted by the promise of a job with excellent perks, and the possibility of getting out under the thumb of a father, brothers, etc. They were also promised good money, which they got, and a life of luxurious surroundings. Those were the volunteers. Others were pressured into service with threats to them or their families. From the start, the Amazons were not just for show. They received advanced training in martial arts, weapons handling, and military drill. By all accounts, many of the Amazons over the years were skilled soldiers, at least on the drill field. In return, the sisters lived a life far beyond the imagination of most Libyan women. They were paid well, lived in nice homes, and received free medical care. Most of all, especially for the truly fanatic of them, they lived close to Gaddafi, and often got to travel with him to places that many of them had barely heard of growing up. However, all of this came at a high price. You can likely imagine what that price was. Throughout the time of the Amazons, there was widespread sexual and physical abuse. Most of the physical abuse came when a sister refused to have sex with a member of Gaddafi's high command, because the leader also gave the Amazons away as gifts or tokens of appreciation to those close to him or as a reward. At times, foreign officials from other Arab lands were given an Amazon, at least while they were in Libya. Once in the unit, you didn't get out until Gaddafi said you were out. This might come due to injury or other medical reasons. But despite what you might be thinking, Gaddafi had no children by any of the Amazons. However, except in a couple of cases involving the top female leadership of the unit, most Amazons were let go after a certain amount of time. Age was both a legitimate factor and an illegitimate one. Women soldiers, like men, eventually could not perform to the required standard and were retired, and they were given good pensions and usually another position of some kind, usually in government. But as you can likely guess, a unit comprised of women whose only job was to guard Gaddafi and make him look powerful and masculine were often quite attractive. And when Gaddafi thought they weren't anymore, they were let go. In other words, the Amazons, like most women in Libya, lived at the whim of a man who espoused a degree of gender equality, but in reality continued the most common types of abuse. The only difference was that the Amazons often lived on palace grounds. Was Gaddafi afraid of an uprising of the Amazons? Like any other cult, the members of the Amazons were true believers in Gaddafi. By the 1980s, he had been in power for over a decade. During this time, intense propaganda campaigns proclaimed his greatness and infallibility. And truth be told, Gaddafi did, at least at first, improve the economic lives of Libyans. Many of the Amazons loved Gaddafi, even worshipped him in a way. The constant propaganda and training reinforced this loyalty. The Amazons also knew that their lives, their families, and their way of life were wholly dependent on Gaddafi. If he went, so did they. Lastly, they knew what happened to foes of the regime. They had seen it personally: torture and slow death. And women were not excluded from that. The Amazons fill a strange space in the history of Libya. They existed as liberated women, at least in propaganda, but they were subject to the same kinds of sexual harassment and abuse that women everywhere experience. At the same time, they lived lives of luxury and privilege that most women in Libya and the Muslim world could and can barely imagine, if at all. About 800 women were revolutionary sisters for Gaddafi. Today, it's believed that only a handful survive, most in other countries, though some lead lives of very quiet anonymity in Libya to this day. Thank you for watching. See you next time.